All right, we are live. Welcome, internet, YouTubers, and what have you, to the um bi-weekly, well, it's sort of an off timing of this one, but this is a meeting of the Backdrop uh, users group um, during a time slot where normally something else happens, but we'll just go with it. My name is Luke McCormick. I am a uh, web manager, developer, consultant near San Francisco. Specifically, I'm in Martinez, California. Uh, I go by Sell Ear on the internet. I have a site called Simplify Drupal where I'm doing some fun things. But we're here to talk about Backdrop specifically. I'll throw it over to Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul Tim. I am not in St. Paul or my normal Deerwood today. I'm in Minnetonka for Christmas festivities. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. But well, excited about we have a big release coming out. And well, the feature freeze is a week from today. And then 2 weeks later, roughly, we're going to release 1.30, which is going to have a lot of cool stuff in it. So excited about that. Joseph, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm mostly just here to listen today.
Izzy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Izzy. I'm a freelancer in Vancouver, BC, Canada. And Backdrop is one of those very useful tools that I like to use. So we can go ahead. Thanks.
So I'll just say quickly, normally this would be our design UX meeting, but Luke came today with some questions about documentation, which seemed very timely, given some other things going on in the issue queue right now and the fact that it's the beginning of the year and there's a big transition. A lot of people are going to be looking at Backdrop maybe in the next few weeks, and having some maybe a primer here on what documentation we currently have and how we can make it better would be good. And for context for this, I'll say there were I think there were like two different discussions at Backdrop Live about documentation. Maybe I'll mention a few things about those to help get started because they answer some of Luke's questions, or at least maybe. In addition to the things one of the problematic areas I would say for documentation right now is contrib modules. We have README files that sometimes are very detailed, sometimes they're not for contrib modules. In theory, every contrib module has the availability to create a wiki. I, for a long time, thought that anybody that was using GitHub could edit those wikis, but I now think you have to be a member of the Backdrop contrib group in order to edit them. So I think that's true. Anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have to be like a maintainer or be on that list in order to edit these wikis, which kind of limits their value. And a lot of modules don't have them. So we could do a better job of encouraging wikis for each contrib module. But at Backdrop Live, there was a big discussion about whether or not the best place for that documentation wouldn't be on our doc site. We don't currently really have this, but we could have like what Drupal does, which is a contrib section of the main doc site. But I have concerns about that as well. I'll leave those for later and just leave that is an idea that's out there. Also at the documentation or at Backdrop Live, we had a whole session on this tutorials website, and Steve Morehouse created kind of a tutorials website. That the idea is that anybody who wants to create Backdrop tutorials could sign up, get an account, and create them there. Again, there are some limitations there. There's some concerns about why are we fragmenting our documentation in so many places, but why don't I leave it at that and toss it back to you, Luke, and to either ask your questions or frame this the way you'd like, and then we can go ahead.
That's always a dangerous thing to do. Uh, well, I have some clients that are, and it's not anything new or anything unique, but that come in to their sites. I've got a few where ownership is changing hands, and so new people are being involved, and old questions are fresh again, and they just kind of wonder how you do the things, and it specifically these days, there's a lot of visual things going on, and so you know instinctively we would tend to say, okay, they want to know about theming. But I find, theming to be kind of a loaded word that for a lot of people assumes a great deal of knowledge and experience that not everybody has. And so I wanted but in terms of the documentation, what brought this forward is where could we send them, and to what extent is lack of documentation because it doesn't exist, or it's not well advertised, or it's out of date, or so it seems very timely and important to understand uh, the, the the kind of documentation process and availability. Um, I also have something else that I want to throw in, but I'm going to throw it into the end. But as an undergraduate, I actually did research and prototyped back in 1980s technology an extensible help system that uh, addressed surprisingly some of the issues that you brought up in your intro there. So maybe I'll come back and revisit that, but I don't want to do that just yet. Let's talk about, like, okay, so you want to learn Backdrop, and what are our self-service options for teaching oneself Backdrop?
Sure. So we could start by just listing what is currently available.
If I can just jump in here, I guess in a way, it reminds me of what are the challenges when a person starts to use Backdrop. And so, you come at it from at least two different personas. One would be somebody who is just new to CMS, and doesn't come with any preconceived notions of what they can do with it. And that may be an easier place for some people to start. The other is people who have been using something else, like Drupal 7 or WordPress. If they come into it, they may already be trying to do something they used to do before, trying to do it in Backdrop. I would have to say that with Backdrop, it is challenging to find the information. Going back to the wikis, the problem we found with wikis as we've been delving into them is that they're not searchable. You cannot search content that's in a wiki. And so all of the information that gets into wikis doesn't actually show up on internet searches.
Yep.
So while it might be something you would think, okay, the code's here, let's do it in the wiki here, that's a major downfall with the wikis, is the lack of being searchable. And then you've got things like the forum, which has a lot of stuff there. And the other thing is that unlike Drupal, where the project pages have support, and almost all of them have a little thumbnail or graphic. And whereas when you look at Backdrop projects, they don't have graphics. And that's something that is, again, I think, a bit of a detriment. And you can go and look at the module before it was ported on the site and see the graphic. And I think that is actually helpful for people to be able to see, okay, what does this module add to my site? In summary, I'd say that Backdrop, the information is in multiple places, and it does present a challenge for people when they first come to Backdrop, because there isn't one place where you're going to find that stuff. It is scattered around. Wikis are not searchable is the second thing. And the third thing is the lack of a graphic that is associated with the project, whether it's a module or a theme, and that would enhance people's recognition of where they might go with it. Okay.
Solid.
Okay. I think you jumped into suggesting some improvements. Again, I think for the purposes of the discussion, just laying out what the current options are would be helpful, and then we can put those in context with the feedback you gave us. The biggest, I'm just going to dive in. The biggest site we have are is it Docs or Doc? Docs.backdropcms.org. So I think for developers, for sure, this is the best resource. It's also a good, because it has a good the best documentation available for hooks and things that are programming related. Absolutely, this is where I would send anybody for that. We do have one other resource, which would be the example. Is it the examples module? Is also, but that actually plays into the documentation site in ways we could talk about later. But those are the two things I would point programmers to. If you're looking to build a site, there is stuff on the Docs site. There's like the introduction to layouts, basic information about content types. That kind of stuff is also on the Docs site. The cms.org, but the things like layouts, basically the user guide. Let's I'm sorry, docs, is it docs.backdropcms.org?
Yeah, DOCS.
Yeah, here we go. So if we look at the Docs site, there's two big sections. Actually, there's a third section that's useful, but the user guide is what you would send a beginner to, and this is going to help them get into basics on things where user guide, quick start, using backdrop. There we go. If you get into the using backdrop, it's a lot of the how to create a homepage, creating and editing content, contact forms. This is going to do a pretty good job at outlining key features for core. However, this is just core, right? So if you're a beginner, now you need documentation for modules. And for that, I think we end up back at it varies from module to module, right? So you can go to you start with the README for each module. There might be something useful there. If not, check to see if it has a wiki. I agree with the problems that were mentioned about wikis. Now, this is what came up really recently, is that for UberCart, somebody in the community created ubercart.dev, which is because there's a lot of documentation for UberCart. The idea was that maybe we had a site just to capture all of that documentation and put it here. And if you go where UberCart documentation, we've got a bunch of pages in here installing UberCart. This is mostly stuff that's been pulled from Drupal and modified to match backdrop. There is some other stuff going on this site besides UberCart, which we'd have to talk to Steve about. And then there's others, there's miscellaneous other sites. I have my own website called learnbackdrop.org. Learnbackdrop.simplo.site, I think. And I'm looking to possibly sort of merge a lot of this stuff into the tutorial site that Steve has. But basically, I have a user guide here that talks about a lot of the same things that are in the backdrop user guide. But the reason for having this separate site was, one, the ease of editing it. Two, I could put my own modules to help organize it the way I wanted, but also because I have a whole bunch of videos that I've created that I feel a little bit uncomfortable about, like going and adding these to the regular doc site, because it seems like these are sort of branded videos for Simplo. So I sort of
But you could certainly mention them now. They seem relevant to the topic of our conversation here.
I am mentioning them now and showing them to you. So I have this site that's available that does try to walk through a lot of the basics, some of the same stuff you would see on the doc site, but in this case with videos. I also have a whole tutorial, and it's this tutorial in particular I'm thinking about moving onto the site with Steve, where it walks through the process of building a farmers market website, and it does things like it lists each content type you would need for this specific site, and what fields you would need. And so this is just sort of a practical way of walking through a specific site. I personally, for me, the most important documentation site is the forum. And I'll say that from two perspectives, one of which it's an easy place for me to contribute to Backdrop CMS documentation. It's also the place where, if as a user, if I have I'm looking for a solution for X, I have a problem, I want to Irina brought this up earlier. Maybe I want to I want to have PDF files that people need to fill out a form and then get access to the PDF file. How do I do that? I would ask that in the form. And I also list this as a documentation site, not just because you can ask questions there, but if, let's say, for example, I had that problem and I solved it, and I think, gee, I would like to share my solution with other people. I would like to document what I did. My go-to place is to go to the forum, to go ahead and ask the question, how would I do X, and then to answer it. So to me, I think of the forum as a documentation site because it's like an FAQ, and I can come here, ask and answer a question, and I'm sharing that with the whole community. And I would, and I often get answers here. I also often come here, Google questions that I documented 2 years ago, but forgot the answer to. And so I find my own answers to my own questions from the past. And so I would say, to me, this is the most important documentation site, personally, that I use on a day-to-day basis.
I'll tell you, this gives me like a giant to-do thing to do. Here, go back one screen to where you just were
Yep.
there just for a second. 1,258 topics in how-to and troubleshooting. So that strikes me as there's a heck of a lot of useful information in there.
Yep.
And it's pretty buried. If we could figure out some way to put a browsable user interface on top of that so that could I mean, because otherwise you're keyword searching, which sometimes works.
Yep.
Or you're trying to read 1,258 lines
Yep.
to see if your thing is in there.
Yep. Here's a common, I would do things like UberCart and then see all the different topics on that. Or if you do commerce, there's people will often say, what are the commerce solutions for Backdrop? And what I always do is I go to the forum, I search for commerce, I scroll down here, and I know there's a topic, e-commerce solutions for Backdrop, and I send them this link. Okay, so this is somebody, oh, look, it was me, 2018. I asked about what are the options for, and over the years, this is actually a kind of a longer topic that keeps coming back and back. And a whole bunch of people have chimed in here. It's not that long, but there's a number of different suggestions from people, and it gets updated from time to time. And so, like for me, this is the documentation page on e-commerce solutions for Backdrop.
Yeah, look at that.
Any other examples like that? If I'm trying to, a common thing that I run into is I'm trying to create recipes, and I need to know how to create a menu item programmatically. So I come to the forum and I say menu item programmatically, and programmatically is this key word. And here, how to programmatically create a menu link. Oh, look, Tim Erickson asked the question. Possibly Tim Erickson answered it after he figured it out. Yep. But not if I Googled programmatically create a node, I might find something I posted, but I know that other people have posted on that as well. Anyways, I find instructions on how to do that in the forum. I'm not sure how
So
good.
just on the
Yeah. Well, what I was about to say is I'm not sure how good our Google cred is here. Like when you search for these things in Google, I'm not sure if the forum is what comes up. We could do a quick test. And I could, well, that was probably, let's not be that specific, but say how to programmatically create a menu link in Backdrop. See if that comes up. Backdrop CMS. Yeah, in that case, that came up as, but it might have been so spot on that to be honest, Luke, the other thing I always tell people that are looking for backdrop documentation is if you can't find the relevant backdrop documentation, just Google Drupal 7 and ask the same question. And so I think our biggest source of documentation for backdrop is the huge store of Drupal 7 documentation out there, 90% of which is probably applicable. The problem is if you're a complete beginner, is you might not know that which 10% to ignore.
Yeah, or even I mean one of the fundamental problems with that is you get answers to your questions, and as computers, doing like including AIs that are still doing this, they'll give you the answer to the question and not tip you off that your question might not be really what you care about. They won't suggest that, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, remembering my early days in Drupal like years ago, where I would Google answers and I find a solution to the problem I was looking at that involved, you know, usually
Yeah.
inserting something into your module.
Well,
is the way they was phrased, and it's something that's like, well,
oh,
actually, if
did
a
I get
human, if
lost
you
or
ask,
did Luke get lost?
oh wait, I know I hear you.
I must have got
Maybe,
lost.
yeah. Well, I still hear
Oh,
you though, Tim.
oh, well,
I
I lost you. I lost you for a
oh
minute.
yeah, yeah. But so I mean the searching for stuff will tell you how to write, a PHP bit of code that you can drop into your module, but we'll neglect to mention that you could just do a view and get all that information instead, which is, the kind of things that I learned. But,
Or won't tell you that there's already a module someone else wrote that does the same thing.
or that it's already built into the system and you don't have to do anything.
Right.
Well, okay. I mean, I agree that this is a problem, but I don't know that any source of documentation has solved that. If anything, you mentioned AI, Luke, and I would argue that increasingly ChatGPT is my go-to source of documentation on Backdrop. And yes,
Yeah.
there are lots of caveats with that. You need to
Yeah.
be careful. But I think AI is probably better equipped to provide the kind of feedback that Luke or Joseph just mentioned, because ChatGPT might actually pick up on the fact of if I say, how do I do X, rather than telling you how to program it. I think ChatGPT might very well refer you to, oh, there's a module for that, or hey, that's in core.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
I I
I don't
I
know of
I wonder.
I don't know of any other source except the forum that would be as good at that, right? If you ask a
Yeah.
question in the forum, you're going to hear from other users who are going to give you that kind of feedback. Oh, you don't need to do that. But that's, that I would, if you need that kind of feedback, like what is the best solution, then you probably need to go to the forum or go to Zulip. And
Izzy raised his hand, but I'm dying to go after that. So go ahead, Izzy.
Yeah, so I did want to put in a plug for Tim's Learn backdrop videos, because when I was starting to do stuff with backdrop, those videos are short and they do give tips in them that really help you. So if you've got clients or others who are learning how to do things with backdrop, I would recommend that looking at those Learn backdrop videos that Tim has done are a very good source. Coming back briefly to the forum, I agree, that's a good resource. One of the challenges I found with that, again, not to be overly critical, but the backdrop search is very much predicated on full word searches, where it doesn't have the capacity of partial word searches, which we do have an issue and a PR that provides that partial word searching. So you will miss stuff if you with just the full word searches. You may have to search a couple of times with words that are related to your topic to find what it is that or to even see that yes, there is stuff there. So those were my 2 bits.
And they relate actually to what I was going to say. Perhaps this gives us a view as to where AI tools can be going. Because can we have an integration with things like
So
ChatGPT, all the potentially Copilot things like that, where we could suggest like, okay, type here, but rather than just like searching ChatGPT on its own, it says, why don't you, remember
so
to look
just
at these forum. Go ahead, Joseph.
so Justin has been talking about a tool that you like point it at a website, and it's an AI tool that you can tell it just use this website as my
Yeah,
data.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
we can point that at the collection of backdrop websites we have: docs, forum, the main site, and just say use these 3 websites as
Yeah.
your database.
Holy cow, let's do that.
I'm in favor of that. I don't know if everybody is, but we could certainly pursue that. But it's a matter of getting somebody to do that work. So I think Justin is already experimenting with it. So we just need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
talk about them. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm just going ahead here. I mean, I wonder if we have like a blog post. If not, this would be a good blog post, is to sort of list all of the different resources that we have. And part of this, one of your criticisms, which is a legitimate criticism, is how fragmented it is. On the other hand, I don't know that that's an avoidable problem. I mean, we can talk about solutions, and I think we can improve upon it.
Wait, what? One of my criticisms?
Well, somebody mentioned it. It might have been Izzy. I mean, it's my own criticism. Just this week, it came up that somebody asked where they wanted to document something for UberCart. And they said, well, where should I do that? And it seems like right now we have the site ubercart.dev. We, in theory, have a wiki for the UberCart module, and we have this doc site. Where should we be documenting ubercart.dev? And the quick answer, which in a very superficial level, I think is true, is that, well, really, we should be documenting this on the docs site, docs.backdropcms.org. And the problem I have with that answer is that there are limitations to what you can do on docs.ubercart.org, and limitations on who has access to it and all of those things. And so unless we can solve all of those problems, we're either limiting who can create the documentation, or we're left with the current solution, which is it's fragmented. And the benefits of fragmentation is that anybody can, is that it's the easiest, the lowest threshold for people to participate. If we don't worry about where it is, that means people can create it wherever they're comfortable. And I have a strong bias towards that, which is just let people, I've created documentation in YouTube on my channel. I create posts in the forum. I've also contributed to ubercart.dev. And I think the fact that I've created as much documentation as I have is because I could just go to the easiest place for me to create it and not worry about like, oh, I have to do it on Drupal, or I even should. If we were to say you really should do it on docs.backdrop.org, there's a whole bunch of obstacles for me doing that. And it might be then that I say, okay, well, I'll just not do it then. So I think this is a tension that we have to acknowledge. If we're talking about like, oh, it would be great to consolidate documentation, yes, that's a worthy goal, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't also stifle the creation of it? And I'm on a soapbox, and I'm going to wrap up in a second. But one of the things that I think really drove Drupal 7 was that you could go to Google was your documentation source. You would go to Google, do a problem, and you would find blog posts, forum posts, Stack Exchange. You could get directed to different kinds of resources. There was never one authoritative place that I went to for Drupal 7 documentation, but I could always find my answer. And like, how can we replicate that? And it's hard because things have changed in a number of ways since Drupal 7 days. But I'll shut up now.
I'm gonna, even though Izzy got his hand up before, I'm gonna actually just barrel in because I've been trying to figure out how to get the hand raising thing to work for a few minutes here. The reason I'm doing it is, oh crap, I just ripped my camera here. Here we go. Uh, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was actually my thesis project as an undergraduate computer science major. Is I put together a system in shell scripts, hilariously enough, um, that implemented a user extensible help system for at the time like a VAX, VMS system. Uh, but but the idea is that it was an early reputation thing, and kind of like what you're saying, it had sort of the wiki idea of like you can just write something in. In my case, it was a very structured. It was like a tree structured help system. So the taxonomy was predefined. Uh, but people could add things to it, and then users could decide what level of authority they insisted on. They could see only stuff that had been written by the manufacturers, or stuff that had been written by the system administrators, or stuff that everyone, that hadn't been reviewed, or stuff that had been like rejected. There was sort of, in ways that we're familiar with in systems like, Reddit and stuff like that. But the relevance to that is I think we can have a choose your own adventure. It doesn't need actually levels, but just you know some source, some source in the documentations page that kind of like maybe it's the table of contents, right? Like here's 10 links. Here's stuff that like is answered. Here's stuff that is is available to you. Here's, ask the AI to search our stuff to see if it answers your question. So, I mean, this all sounds pretty plausible. And I like the idea of a blog post that we can then push into our dashboard news feed that keep it current, keep it up. All right, Izzy, all yours.
Yeah, so if we're going back to where can I find help, I think it's also worth mentioning the YouTube channel that Backdrop CMS has, because meetings like this one and
Where we're going to show up.
but there is a ton of information there. So if people are coming to this wondering where am I going to find this, yes, it's all over the place, but these are some great resources that they can go to get a feeling for and learn more about Backdrop. That's it.
Just a second, I had muted myself. How do people feel about the Uber cart thing? So we have this community generated Uber cart documentation site, and should we be encouraging that, or should we be trying to get all of that documentation into docs.backdropcms.org?
I think if the news feed that Backdrop has was more active, that would be a real plus, because sometimes that sits there for weeks without anything new. So if something like the UberCart is something that's come up, even just pushing a message about that through the feed, I think would help people see that there is activity going on, and it might might be a reminder. Oh, okay, maybe that's where I want to go. So I think it's good it's going on, the Uber card. I'm not actively using Uber card, but if I
Mhm.
saw that coming through a news feed, it would at least be in the back of my mind. Okay, there's somewhere else. Go ahead, Luke.
I had a similar thought, more the passive versus the active version of that. That we don't want to rain on the parade. Like if somebody's doing something, like
Mhm.
it's so easy to neg stuff, and let's just say no, that's good. Keep doing that, and we should link to it and encourage it,
Mhm.
and fold it into the rest of the things, while letting it stay, invited in. If somebody wants to fold their stuff into a larger thing, let's encourage that, because I think that's generally good. But I, you know, I maybe this is obvious, but I think we want to be careful not to discourage useful things that people are doing.
Yeah, but so I think where it gets tricky, right, is in this case, so Steve Morehouse created this website. He ported a bunch of documentation to it. I think he got a lot of kudos and congratulations, thanks for doing that. Recently, I was looking for some documentation on UberCard. I found some pages that hadn't been ported, so I just got access to his account, which he was very gracious and eager to give me. I added
Mhm.
a few more pages. Now, somebody else in the community is saying, "Well, I want to do some documentation, but I feel like it should go on backdrop.org or on the doc site. But like if I put it there, that seems weird because there's this other site out there. So where should I do it?"
Hmm.
And I mean, I get that is problematic, right? Like somebody else might easily think that they think it would be better to put their documentation on a different site, but then it starts to get fragmented. And so I don't know. I mean, I think Uber Cart's a little bit of a weird example because it's a site that could sustain its own site on its own, whereas most modules couldn't. But
I think all the examples are weird examples. Like there's taxonomy for something like this gets hard because the information with any field like this is is not homogeneous. It has huge clumps and things it's hard to get a handle on it.
well, I think at the minimum we ought to have a Google Doc or a blog, well, maybe a blog post or a page. It could be just like a page on the doc site. Maybe that's where it should be, is on the doc site that just said the like a guide to community documentation,
Yeah,
and
totally.
that lists all of the other places other than here where you can find stuff, and it's very inclusive. Any place that you might find stuff could be added to that page.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, on backdropcms.org, there's this support menu. There's the resources thing, and it's a small enough list that my guess, and I mean my instinct is that that's where people would go to try to figure out where things are. And
mhm,
so we should make efforts to make sure that from there at least you can get to the others, and then try to have them kind of self-referencing. The top few. Each of them should start with, well, here's the others. Like,
mhm.
so since none of them are the only thing, ask Steve to have something on his site that says, besides here, there's this other stuff.
I'm going to share my screen again quick because this is a good point. On backdrop.org, under support, we have links to. So the user guide used to be part of backdropcms.org. It was not on the doc site, and it got moved there. And actually, this is a little bit out of date because if you click on this, it takes you to the doc site, but it doesn't have the like go to a different site. I mean, this one does too, right? Documentation takes you to the doc site,
Yeah, yeah.
but, but it has the little icon that shows you're going off site, whereas the user guide doesn't. Um, and we would end up with now two different links, both pointing towards a different site. I don't think that's a problem. But how would we, should we add a link here that's community documentation that points to just a page that lists everything? Or should we just, when you go to the user guide, maybe there's a link here that says community documentation
Yeah.
and we list all of the other
I mean that menu already strikes me as a little fragmented. I think I I think I'd feel happier if there was some hierarchy so that there's one that if you don't know, you click on it.
Mhm.
And it has like, descriptions of the others rather than just words, right? I mean, for example, one of the things, documentation API, like is very programmer focused. And, programmers, as I say, are like a super important part of the community. But there's giant, huge, important constituencies that aren't programmers, and they're just baffled wherever they go. I'd like to make someplace that they fall through to, just so that even if even if there's nothing there, so that they know there's nothing there and they can stop looking for it. Just something that just kind of gives you a, you know, like a start here, a readme for like, you know,
Yeah, there is this resources link at the top, which is just a bunch like the forum, the newsletter, the issue queue. Um,
is that it? Is that is that the start here?
yeah, this is that resources page. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe this should be a little bit more inclusive, or here's a classic example though of why community documentation gets created, is that like I could say we should create a page like this on our site. But then I think, well, what I would like is sort of an info chart or a graphics, a page with, as Izzy said, graphics that maybe show all of the resources, but in a little bit more visual way.
Hmm.
Well, I know if yeah, I think you might say, yeah, that's a good idea, and maybe even a few people do. But as soon as I start trying to do that, it's the kind of thing that's going to get bike shedded. Everybody is going to have a different idea of what that's going to look like, which only matters if we want to put it on backdrop.org. But if I just put it on my own site, then I can do whatever I want. So what happens then is I'm inclined to just create something and put it on my own site so I don't have to have so it doesn't get bogged down like in
Yeah,
20 different ideas of what it should look like.
yeah.
Izzy raised his hand again. Oh, or not. Did you,
Yeah,
Izzy, you
yeah,
want to jump in?
I did raise my hand. So, just coming back to the user guide,
Mhm.
I would strongly urge people to consider the subheading using backdrop, because that is a much better entry point. The user guide, you come there and it's got a bunch of stuff there. Um, and I think if you go to the using backdrop subheading, that is probably the place where people knew would find themselves feeling more comfortable being here. The other
Mhm.
thing with this menu thing is it doesn't collapse like a DHTML menu. So you kind of lose track of where am I. The left menu
Mhm.
is not as helpful in showing you where you are in that menu. The other thing I wanted to mention briefly, and I know we don't have that same infrastructure, but Drupal, because all of their projects were using the project module, it gave rise to a URL which was drupal.org/tracker. And I used to find that to be an excellent browsing place. Like if I was just having a coffee in the morning, I would go to the tracker. And I know other developers, when I mentioned that to them as a tip, they found that to be a useful place. And you would see issues coming up from different contrib modules. Um, and it would just kind of alert you to some of the development, some of the ideas, and some of the different modules that were being developed or were being used. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of an infrastructure that helps to, without having to build a new page or build a tutorial or build something. It was just an artifact of the system because it had the tracker there. So anything that was there, or any activity that was going on would show up, and it would be the latest comments from whoever. So I found that to be a really good learning place when I was starting up with Drupal, and still use it.
Okay.
It's the recent content block.
Can you see the Drupal 7 page now? Am I sharing that?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So just as another model to look at, this Drupal, in the Drupal documentation site, they have this page for contributed documentation. And, it basically has like advanced views. Is that a specific? Oh, these are specific modules. I thought I saw like, did I jump into it? Okay. Let me go back, hit the back button. No, that's where it took me. Anyways, the point is that here individual modules can be listed. I'm sure this is optional. This is not all modules. It's modules that have chose to include documentation on the doc site. We don't have the equivalent of this. I thought I saw accounting distribution. Okay. There's different ways into this. I think there are pages that sort of lump different types of modules together. But anyways, ultimately the point is that these are pages that are documented on the documentation site. Well, this is not much. So I went to backup and migrate, and this is really not back. What is it? I wonder if this just takes you to, well, that just takes you to the project page. So this looks like it's something that's been added fairly recently. There's another page that actually that was more of like a wiki for contrib modules. Maybe here it is. I think this is what I was looking for. Yeah, this is what I was looking for. But again, you talk about fragmented, right? So you get into this wiki and it's got things like accessibility, and you can click on modules or accounting modules, and it clicks on them. If I go down to am I back at the same place?
Yeah.
No, this is not the same page I was on, but I'm not sure what the difference is between it. The part of the point that I was getting at, though, is you should be able to click here. There was a way in Drupal 7. I could go there, and then I would have a list. Some modules would have wiki pages that anybody could add to in this documentation section. And it was very community orientated. It was not, one of the problems you run into is the difference between documentation from the maintainer and community generated documentation. So in Drupal 7, oftentimes maintainers would create a README or a page that they would edit, but then on the Drupal.org, there would be a site where anybody could go and add something. And we don't really have a good anybody can build it out option. And to take this all back, there's been a big idea that got some momentum at Backdrop Live, was that there is on our doc site, we have no contrib section. Or do we? No, we have a contributor's guide. There is nothing on this site for contributed modules. And the idea is, what would we need to add a section for contributed modules and then allow people to add documentation here? The advantage would be that it would be more Google friendly. It would show up in guides. It would also be in a more central place. The disadvantages are that I find this an intimidating site to edit on. I feel like unless you feel like you're an expert, you don't want to go and edit this. Whereas if we were using the wikis on GitHub, like, I feel completely comfortable opening up a wiki and editing it because I know it's community documentation. I know that anybody else can edit my mistakes. It doesn't feel as official. Whereas if I start to edit here, it just feels too official. And I don't know if people are going to like what I'm putting or that I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong.
So I think something that the Drupal doc site used to have that and the API guide
Yes.
was the comments.
Yes.
So you could, like, if there was like a gotcha with using some function, you could just make a comment and say, hey, this function has some weird behavior if you don't know what you're expecting from it. And you didn't have to be, it wasn't the official documentation.
Right.
So,
I think I think Drupal's
but then
going the same way we did in trying to get rid of that kind of community input, and I really miss it. Like, how do I get to a page that has that?
they got rid of it. It's all gone.
Oh, it is completely gone. So
Yeah.
is all the old community documentation for modules gone? Because that used to have comments on it.
Yeah, they removed comments from everything on this and the API site.
Because it's just too spammy, probably.
I don't know. I never felt like there was a ton of spam on it.
I didn't either, although that might be because some people were spending a lot of time getting rid of it, and they wanted to eliminate that job. A lot of people have told me that they miss that, but anytime this comes up, other people say to me they hated that. They hated the comments on Drupal.org because it was prone to make mistakes, right? The comments weren't all accurate. Sometimes people would put comments that were just wrong. But I mean, sincerely, right? They thought they were helping, but now you had to sort of you had to filter through that and figure out what's real and what isn't. So I believe it was a very deliberate choice in the backdrop community that I was not a part of to not use comments like in that way. But I stand on the other side. I would like to see more opportunities for comments, and I would rather that more people help create documentation, even if some of it's wrong, because it can always be fixed. Wrong documentation can be fixed, but documentation that hasn't been created just doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, I'm here in the first place actually because in the 90s when I was looking for a new thing, I did my first LAMP project and I discovered the MySQL and PHP sites, and both of those sites at the time had these just incredible comment sections, particularly MySQL. Like you would go to like learn how to use, select, and you'd get, 3 or 4 pages of well-written documentation, and then a dozen or so just like brilliantly
Mhm.
targeted comments. And I've always, to this day, I still don't know. Like I'm still wondering, like, what was their moderation system that managed to surface such it was like spam free? I don't know
They
if
have a vote thing. It's like a upvote downvote kind of like Reddit.
yeah, is
Yeah,
that is
that's
that
it.
it still works? I
Yeah,
was
the
it's so
PHP site,
good.
the
Yeah,
PHP
yeah,
site still has all of them.
yeah.
So low quality ones will go down over time, and high quality ones would go up over time.
Yeah.
Still
Well,
works, huh?
Yeah.
Stack Exchange. 10 years ago, I was at Drupal camp, and somebody told me, the place for Drupal documentation is Stack Exchange. That's where you should go to find answers to your questions, right? That's where the community was most active. Don't go to the forum on Drupal.org because nobody's there, is what I was told. It wasn't completely true, but my point is that Stack Exchange for many years was like the place to go for Drupal information, and it was all community generated with the same kind of tools that we're talking about, up and down voting. But
Right.
there are also sort of editors right in there that sort of also help keep it focused. So, and that's any
Yeah, you're right, Joseph. I just looked over at the like PHP documentation site, and
Yeah.
it's still doing it. It's still crowdsourcing improvements.
okay.
Good model.
I've heard from a bunch of people that the editors on Stack Exchange are a bit overzealous.
They are sometimes. I think it depends on which section you're in and stuff, but yes. And some of them are very polite about it, some of them are less so. I've had people, when I've tried to contribute to Stack Exchange, I've had some almost rude, like this is the wrong place for that kind of.
it seems like all the time I go in there and it says this is a duplicate of this other issue, and I go to the other one and it's not a duplicate at all. Like the one they shut down was the question I had, and
Mm.
the other one does not answer that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, or the other one has answers from 10 years ago that don't work anymore because they removed that function.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there isn't a solution that's going to solve all of these problems for all of us, I don't think. Other than, I mean, I do think AI is going to be, this is an area where AI, I think, has a lot of potential to help us out. I will admit that when I added some documentation to the Uber cart site, the community, the documentation I was copying was community generated, which meant some of it was fairly poorly written because it was written by a tech person, right, who had some really good information, but they didn't structure it well to make it easy to read. So I copied and pasted that into ChatGPT. I said, "Can you reorganize this?" And then I took that, I reread it, made some edits myself afterwards, and I feel like the end product was much better than what
Yeah.
was there on Drupal.org. And I think I could create a lot of pretty good documentation by taking existing documentation and using AI tools to just, I mean, and if you don't like the word AI, what about something like grammar? Right? There are
Sure.
other tools that don't use the word AI in them that help people, format and just clean up their prose to make it more readable. So, and I think using tools like that could help.
All right, why don't we wrap this up? We're over
Yeah.
time as it is. I think somebody should write a blog post about this, and I'll volunteer to do it if nobody else, more reliable wants to do it. So because I'm excited. This actually seems pertinent, straightforward. I'll just compile the stuff we talked about here, throw it into like a blog post, and see what we got. What do you think?
I would love for you to do that. I'm currently, I'd enjoy working on this blog post, but I've got 5 others ahead of it in the queue. So
Yeah.
if you could do it, that would be great.
You'll get to review it before it gets published. So let me get past the blank page.
What I might do for you, Luke, is spend a few more minutes after this meeting just throwing some notes into this Google Doc I started, and then I'll give you a link just for you
Brilliant.
to use it as a resource. Okay.
Yeah.
If I
Uh,
can, if I can just quickly throw in a word here too. Um, I think the stuff that was being looked for on the Drupal.org site is under their site building. And when you open up I put a link in the chat. And when you open that up and then you go into the contributed modules, unfortunately you can't expand the thing unless you click on the item. But that's when you start to get into each of the different modules. And then when you get into a particular module like mobile navigation, it will start to give you more help that's related to that module. And this is like how to build the site, how to do something. And I'm not sure that was the section of documentation you were looking for earlier, Tim, when you were trying to find your way around.
It sounds like it might have been. It was definitely a part that anybody could edit and where you could start. There were some contrib modules, but not all of them. There were also just like what I would have called recipes at the time. For example, one of my first forays into Drupal documentation was creating a map that showed multiple locations and how far you were from something. And I didn't create it myself, but I found somebody else who had created like a step-by-step. Here's the modules to use. Here's how you configure them. And I found mistakes as I tried to do it. I found mistakes in their documentation. And so I actually, for the first time, hit the edit button and I updated that recipe, I would call it, that description of how to create a feature. And yeah, but that kind of stuff doesn't seem to be, if it's less emphasized on Drupal.org than it used to be. And I would like to find that section, and it might be what you just described, Izzy. I'm looking for it now, but did you put it in the chat?
I
Did you
did.
say?
Yes, I did.
Okay, there. Oops, I lost it again. Let's end the meeting, but I'm going to be here for a minute, and I'm going to still try to. I'm going to share the link to the Google Doc I started, which doesn't have much in it, but I'm going to add more. And if anybody else just wants to drop some links or thoughts into this Google Doc for Luke, that would be great. It's just anyone with link can edit it. Oh, you found site recipes. Yeah, exactly that. That's probably what I was looking for. Okay, let's end the meeting.